Well, Carl Bernstein, what were the consequences of the revelations you did in the Watergate affair?
I think there's a lot of mythology about what we did, that our stories were the beginning of a process that led to the resignation of the President of the United States, because that president was a criminal and presided over a criminal presidency from the beginning of his term to the end of his term. And we were able to obtain certain pieces of information very soon after the Watergate break-in in June of 1972 that began to make it clear that there were events put into action by the President of the United States that eventually were shown to be criminal. But what our stories did, there's a mythology that we were responsible for the impeachment or the resignation of the president. Rather, what we did is our stories were read by a judge who then put pressure on the burglars in Watergate to tell their secrets. Then there was a congressional hearing that was convened by the Senate of the United States, at which great revelations came about. That hearing was convened partly because the senators had read our stories, but then what we really did was we were part of the process of the American system working. The press doing its job, the legislature doing its job, the judiciary doing its job, and the political system responding to the information and demanding that Richard Nixon leave office.
So in your own words, apart from all the mythology, what would you say when then were the consequences of your work?
I'm probably not the best judge of that. I think there was a lot of interest among young people, particularly in journalism, because the results of our stories had a certain effect, and I think that people were drawn to that, perhaps some for the right reasons, some for the wrong reasons. But I'm not the best judge of that. It's a complicated process, and it continues to go on, the process. I mean, Watergate has a place in the American story that is somewhat unique. And at the same time, what's not unique about it is that it is part of the American system working at its best. And unfortunately, right now, we're living in an era when the American system is not working. I'm not suggesting that we have a president of the United States or have had any others that should have been removed from office, but rather that our political system is in terrible trouble, particularly the legislative branch.
But is it fair to say that the end result of the reporting that you started was the resignation of the president?
I think that's overly. The end result of our reporting, no. The end result of the whole process, yes.
Was the resignation of the most powerful man in the world?
Yes, of the whole process working. Our stories, the legislature, the judiciary, politicians in Congress who turned against Richard Nixon and said, hey, he's a criminal, he must leave office.
And to what extent were these consequences something that you could envisage when you started the reporting?
I think when we started we could not, but very early on, there was a day about 3 months after the Watergate break-in, Bob Woodward and myself, every day we would go get coffee together in a little vending machine room off of the newsroom floor, and we had just learned about a secret fund that had been controlled by the principal aides to Richard Nixon that had paid for the bugging at Watergate and other undercover illegal activities against Nixon's opponents. And I put a dime in the coffee machine and I felt a chill go down my back. We were about to do this story about this secret fund and who controlled it. And I said to Woodward, I said, oh my God, this president is going to be impeached. And Woodward said to me, oh my God, you're right. And we can never use that word impeach around the newsroom of the Washington Post because we do not have an agenda. We're here only to find out the facts, and we don't want our bosses and editors to think we have an agenda.
But when you understood that, what were your deliberations?
didn't affect our deliberations. Our deliberations were about getting the information, continuing to report the story. It was very incremental. If you look back at those stories, they're not big stories that say the President of the United States is a criminal. At no point did it say that. None. It was incremental about this event, that event, and within a few months we were able to say in a story, the Watergate break-in was part of a vast conspiracy of political espionage and sabotage that was orchestrated by the men closest to the President of the United States.
You say it was important for you and to other people to understand that you didn't have your own agenda. Why was that?
Because the job of the journalist is to find the best obtainable version of the truth, wherever the facts lead. If the facts had led to exonerating Richard Nixon, we should have presented those facts. Just wherever, our job was to find out what happened.
Regardless of the consequences?
Sure. Journalism, reporting is not done, I believe, to bring about a certain result in the political system or by the voters of the country. It's done to get the information out there so people can make up their own minds about things.
Why is this distinction so important?
Because we're not the judiciary. We're not the electors. We're reporters. Simple as that.
How hard is that in real life?
It's very hard. Look, that reporting, I keep giving this definition as the reporting being the best obtainable version of the truth. Well, it takes persistence. It takes having common sense. It takes a good deal of being a good listener. It takes, I believe, not having a preconceived notion of where the story is going to take you, but that you go where the facts take you. It has to do with context. So all of those things.
Are there any boundaries to this ruthlessness of reporting?
Sure. The law. It seems to me that reporters ought not be breaking the law. We shouldn't be breaking into people's houses. We shouldn't be tapping their telephones, as the Murdoch press did, for instance, in the hacking
scandal. That's about the methods, but when it comes to discuss the consequences.
No, it's very important, the methods. And if we begin to adapt illegal methods ourselves, as happened with the Murdoch press in the hacking scandal in England, that's a terrible thing, and it will undermine what it is we're supposed to do. So those prohibitions seem to me to be very important.
But when you report the best attainable version of the truth, are there any boundaries to what consequences this can lead to and then what considerations you should have as a reporter?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
Well, for example, issues of national security, are there an end? Yeah?
Look, it seems to me that we need to be responsible in terms of national security issues. I'll give an example. Bob Woodward, myself, some other reporters knew during the Cold War that the United States had tapped into the undersea cable that enabled Soviet submarine communication. And from that tap into that cable underseas, we were able to get vast amounts of information. The United States intelligence services were. It was called Operation Ivy Bells, was the name of the intelligence gathering program. We knew all about it. Of course we didn't put it in the newspaper. That you don't act in ways that would be inimical to the security of your community. It's basic. So of course there's a self-imposed restraint. But it doesn't mean, though, that if a president or a senator or anybody else says if you disclose that, it's going to endanger national security, and you don't print it or put it online, you have to then make a judgment, well, will it endanger national security? And you have to do your own reporting and make your own judgment. But I think you have to be very careful about these things.
Were there any considerations about national security in the case of Watergate?
No, Nixon tried to say there were, but we said no, there weren't.
Why did he try to use that card?
He tried it more with the FBI than he did with us, because he didn't want the FBI to investigate into areas that he knew would lead to the cover-up that he led of what it was his presidency had been doing.
There are examples in American political history when powers have interfered with playing the card of national security. For example, the incident of the Bay of Pigs, when Kennedy interfered with the New York Times. What is your view on this?
My view is that journalists have to be very careful about accepting without doing their own test to see if the authorities claiming national security are legitimately claiming it. More often than not, my experience has been they have not been legitimate claims. But that doesn't mean there aren't instances where there are, and I could cite a good number of them where there have been legitimate interests. And also, there's a basic concept that you don't disclose means and sources of intelligence gathering that would compromise those means and sources of the government's abilities.
I have tried to coin the word konsekvensneutrality, which is basically is about the same concept that you're talking about. This means that the reporter should report relevant information and true information, but you should not let the consequence of the news influence your decisions to publish or not. What is your view on this?
I believe that the purpose of reporting is to get the story and the information out there, not to bring about a desired political result. And that it's simple as that. That the most important thing that a reporter does, or a journalistic institution, is to decide what is news. And that decision ought not be based on electing this candidate or that, or passing this law or that. It ought to be in regard to the facts and context about this politician or this law or whatever it is. It is not about trying to bring about a preconceived result politically.
Because then you will be a politician yourself.
Well, I think then you then abandon your ability to continue to report in a way that people will have faith in your reporting.
And this is also an ethical view, of course, on our profession. What would you say is happening to this notion in today's reporting?
I think there's much less problem with the reporting today. I think there's great reporting all over the world, maybe more than we've ever seen, particularly because of what's going on that often we don't know about in Africa, in Central America, in Latin America. Great reporting about all kinds of conditions and oppressions that we don't usually publicize in the West, in the traditional media. Great reporting, and I see a lot of it by judging different organizations' prizes, by the work of organizations that work in behalf of free speech and a free press. So I think there's a more important problem, and that is the way that our information, when we do have the best obtainable version of the truth, is received by citizens. I think in the Western democracies particularly, and in the democracies of the former communist East, that there has become an ideological moat that is separating left and right, in which each side has become so enveloped by the belief in its own sacrosanct principles and ideology that too many individuals, ordinary citizens and politicians, are not interested in the best obtainable version of the truth. They're looking for information online, in newspapers, on television, for information that will support their already held point of view. I think we have a much bigger citizen problem than we have journalism problem.
In Sweden, there we have an analogy from game hunting when it comes to journalism, and it's in some circles considered heroic to shoot and kill a big elk with more than 12 tags on his horns.
Right.
What do you say to this?
I'm not sure. You mean that reporters are going after big targets without thinking?
If you force a minister or a big guy in business to resign, well, you have succeeded in a sense.
Well, I think you succeed by doing good stories that serve the common good, whatever the, but not because it's of a particular individual that you're writing about or a particular objective, except to do the reporting. I don't know what else to say.
Is it journalistic heroism to shoot and kill a big elk?
I think these questions are a little too simple sometimes. It's not our job to shoot anybody. That's the first thing. We're not in the shooting business. We're in the business of reporting. And if in the course of reporting some big beast in the wilderness comes down, that's part of the process. Is it the objective to bring down big beasts in the wilderness? No, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. That's why I'm asking you. So there were some consequences for you and your colleague Bob Woodward. What were these?
You'll have to give me a better hint of what you mean.
I mean, this affected your life for centuries.
We were 28 to 30 years old at the time. We were reporting for the Washington Post on Watergate. We then wrote All the President's Men. We wrote a subsequent book called The Final Days about the last year in office of Richard Nixon, which really in many ways gave the dimensions of this criminal presidency that I'm talking about in a way that the original reporting for the Post only hinted at, as well as the human story of Richard Nixon. It's an empathic book, actually, toward Richard Nixon and his own personal tragic aspects, as well as his criminal impulses. But obviously, it defined our lives professionally and to some extent in the way we're perceived by others, and yet we're still, I hope, the same people basically that we've always been. But we've had great opportunities as a result of this, and we've written other books. Bob has written 16 books. I've written 6, and we do commentary, we give speeches, we're here at conferences like this one in Sweden, so we've been blessed, and hopefully we continue to do the work, and particularly also to meet with our colleagues and try to help them understand some of the things we believe.
Carl Bernstein, thank you very much.
Thank you, that was terrific.